distinguished speaker. We'll start with Sam. Microphones, we need 2 microphones to run, or 3, so we can you manage the time properly.
Thank you. I've attended many, many lectures in this room, and I must say that your talk was a breath of fresh air. I have a couple quick questions. One is, in the agencies that you mentioned that have been successful, can you talk a little bit about the governing agents, the governing bodies that oversee these agencies, both from the legislative branch of government, and how the judiciary came up to speed to be able to understand industrial policy and to support the industrial policy when dispute rises? Also, are there similar examples you can give from a services-based policy, assuming that when you say industrial, you're meaning more manufacturing here? And lastly, has anyone hired you in Palestine yet?
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask you, I didn't catch your second question. What was the second one?
In terms of governing, the oversight of the, you have agencies that have been created. What are the I mean, the states, for example, an agency would be overseen by state legislator. Is it also centralized?
Yeah.
Because that's a major issue here, is that we create agencies because we have a failed political system, that there's not oversight of the agencies created. So that's why I'm trying to lead you to give us advice. What kind of proper oversight is needed for these agencies?
Okay, Aqil. Dr. Aqil.
Thank you. My name is Akram Kola. I have 2 questions. Question number 1, you mentioned the concept of quality, and you give the example of Taiwan and India, and then the Chinese product. Looking at the Palestinian product, how could you advise the Palestinian government within the umbrella of industrial policy you talk about, the selective intervention, that help equality as a concept for the Palestinian product to compete? This is the first question. The second question, you mentioned certain concepts that production transformation, development, and employment. Looking at the Palestinian economy, the Palestinian situation, which is mainly rely on consumer spending, consumption, do you see really any real development for the Palestinian economy or sustainable development? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sabri.
Hi, my name is Sabri Sayigh. I'm a board member of MAS. I love the way you articulated the importance of leadership for evolution in economic development. But I have to beg to differ with you on the basis that collecting different technologies in a device does not deprive you from the fact that you are a genius. So the way you addressed Steve Jobs is something that really caused some anxiety in me, because I have been working with liquid crystals for a while. I have been in the processor technology, and I have not been able to see somebody who has managed to articulate the collection of many technologies and put them in a device such as the iPhone and the iPad and the tablet technology. And you come now and deprive the man of his right of being a genius simply because you disagree and you say that he built on previous technologies. Indeed, that's the case, but I think you've been a bit harsh.
Thank you.
Thank you. Samir Halele. I'm also in the board of MAS, but not on that base, I'm putting my comment here. I am for more proactive role for government in the economy. However, I need to ask specific questions about Palestine. First is, you're talking about the role of state. What if the state is not a state? What if the state is not empowered to do that? And what if the state has other priorities? Not the economic anyway. It could be other political or other social. How can we articulate the role of the state vis-a-vis the private sector in this context, or vis-a-vis the economy in this context? And what if the state was busy solving political issues, however people has to invest and survive and employ and being employed, and there is no vision and there is no plan. What shall we do? Shall we wait? I'll give you an example. The state till now have done a maximum of 3 years plan, maximum. Midterm plans, 3 years. We as private sector have done a 17 years plan, a vision, for example. You said that the vision is usually done by the state and the private sector do something tangible next year or the year after. I'm telling you it's exactly the opposite in our case. So I think we need just to digest what you have said about other experiences and try to define and design really a good formula of intervention in the Palestinian case. That's how I can really benefit from such a lecture. Thank you very much.
Can I reply to some of these?
This is the last, round, the last one this round.
My name is Riyad. On your last section, when you talked about conditions or requirements for the BOEs, you mentioned about the need for a small number of elite. You know, the elite would be a small number that would spearhead this this IP effort. The question I have is, I mean, this gives us a threat of maybe corruptibility, or if the policy is not institutionalized and it's confined to a small number of people, okay, there's room for things going bad. The other question is the different experiences of East Asia, specifically South Korea. Is there a need for, I'm talking about wages, I'm talking about the role of unions, is there a need for competition to, because we know in the early stages, the government in South Korea and other East Asian, they were ruled by military dictatorships. There was very strong, repressive measures to keep wages down, to restrict union activity for the sake of, competitiveness. Do you see, what do you think, about that?
Thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, the easiest one to deal with is from Sabri's Sayigh. I hope that I made it clear, I thought I made it clear. I do think Steve Jobs was a genius, but not a genius in technology, a genius in design, but that is in no way to reduce his genius. My point is that there was a complementarity, not a competitiveness. The state made the big technological breakthroughs, that is the public laboratories themselves, or the public laboratories commissioning work from the private sector in these things like liquid crystal displays and microprocessors and hard drives and so on. And then he took these and put them together into products, and there's no question that second step is a step of genius as he did it, and his designer Johnny Ives. So I don't mean in any way to diminish that achievement, but the reason why I'm making that example is because in general, in the public in general, Apple innovated all these things. Apple developed the technologies and so on, and that is simply not true. That common story simply ignores the key role of the state in developing these breakthrough technologies. And so the common story fits with this wider story of the private sector is like a lion or a caged lion, a lion in a cage, which is just waiting to jump free from all the state restrictions placed upon it. I have to say I work for the World Bank. I know and I like the World Bank. I think the world needs an organization like the World Bank. However, I think that it has done quite a lot of damage by propagating that idea that in all these developing countries there is a sort of potential private sector just waiting to spring free from state regulation. So the job of the state is just to kind of deregulate, get out of the way, and let these private entrepreneurs get on with it. That is simply deeply misleading in terms of the historical record of how development has come about. There's been much more complementarity between the states and private markets in the cases where there was success, just as there are many cases where the state has destroyed markets, has really impeded development. Both are true. And so, as I said earlier, one response to protection is we must do less trade protection. The other response is to say protection is a powerful instrument. Like any powerful instrument, it can be used well or it can be used badly. It is often used badly, but it can be used well, and we have historical examples of how it has been used well, that is well in order to advance the development, to improve the development process. Anyway, so that was the answer to the question of Steve Jobs' genius. He was a genius, but in design, not in technology. There have been several questions about the future of Palestine, and the questions convey the kind of pessimism, the deep pessimism about all the restrictions there are on Palestine's development, a kind of sense of almost hopelessness. For example, you said the state may be busy with political issues. It may not be concerned with industrialization. But look, just go back to what I said about Taiwan. For an economy with a population of 22 million people, it had a very small agency of about 150 engineers. Well, and which operated this industrial extension service that visited factories up and down the country all the time, decade after decade. Is it completely infeasible to think of Palestine developing a similar kind of agency? Maybe you would need only, I don't know, 50 engineers, 70 engineers, whatever the figure may be. That's not a huge resource commitment relative to the potential advantages of pushing out technical advice, hands-on technical advice to firms across the industrial sectors that are operating within Palestine and those which might be developed. This is small-scale industrial policy. It doesn't involve picking winners in the kind of East Asian sense, like the Koreans went into steel, and so on. It involves industrial policy of a sort of nudging kind, without great state resources at stake. That is, the cost of screwing up, so to speak, is not very much. But as I understand it, there is really nothing of this kind. I was talking with a senior figure from Maus before this talk who said, well, we have a trade promotion organization, as though a trade promotion organization was a sort of substitute for the industrial extension service that I was talking about. Not at all. The Trade Promotion Agency is about how to open up markets in Europe and so on and so on. It doesn't get involved with what's happening on the factory floor. And what seems to be missing here is some sort of state push, public sector push for improvements at the factory floor. Let's see, what else? On the first question about the governing bodies of the pockets of excellence that I identified, that is a really interesting question, and the short answer is that I just don't know. It would be interesting, for example, to look at the literature about DARPA. DARPA is by far and away the most successful industrial policy agency possibly in the world, certainly in the United States, because DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and the word defense is very important because it puts it under the defense umbrella and keeps it out of the line of fire of Republicans. But DARPA has, over the decades, commissioned many breakthrough technologies across ICTs, across biotech, across nanotech, and so on. So it would be very interesting to know how it is that DARPA has managed to keep below the radar, so out of the sight of the Republicans who hate all this kind of stuff. And that would link directly to your question about the governing bodies, but unfortunately I really don't know anything more about that. So, I also don't know anything about the future of the Palestinian economy. Just let me repeat the point. It doesn't seem beyond the wit of man to institute something like an industrial extension service to get out and help people like the shoemaker in Hebron, who, as I said, is supply constrained. He's not demand constrained. He could double his production, but he can't. And he can't because his factory is hopelessly inefficient. And day by day, he has no incentive to kind of restructure it. But with an outside push, he could.
Thank you. The second round was, but I want to encourage those who want to talk in Arabic. Mr. Wade can understand.
No, I can't.